As you guys know, Invincible is one of my favorite shows of all time, and I love talking about it, which is why today we are ranking all 8 episodes of Invincible Season 1. And this is going to be a 3-part series, so I'll be doing Season 2 and 3 in another video. But once I've ranked all the episodes, I'll crown 3 as the best of the best, raising them to S tier plus. And I'll be doing the same for my least favorite episode, demoting it to F tier hell. And to make sure your favorite episode doesn't end up in D or F tier, there are 3 things to consider when ranking them. 1, it needs to have an engaging plot. Is the pacing structured properly? Are the characters developing, and is the dialogue engaging? 2, what is memorable about the episode? Does it have a lasting impact on the story and us as viewers, or is it just like a villain of the week? And 3, how well is the episode executed within the wider story? Does it fit well within the arc? Is it setting up a future development? And of course, I'll consider other things like the comedy of the episode, standout characters, and the animation quality. But with all that said, let's get into it. Alright, episode 1 of Invincible kicks things off with an attack on the White House, introducing us to the Mauler twins and the Guardians of the Globe, who are able to stop the Maulers from carrying out their attack. Later in the episode, we see Mark, who is currently powerless, and as Omni-Man's son, this obviously frustrates him because he wants to be like his dad and inherit those same abilities. And it also frustrates Omni-Man because even he has expected Mark to develop powers by now. But besides this, their family has a good relationship, and fortunately enough, Mark's powers suddenly activate, so him and Omni-Man are able to finally start training together. Mark is beating up a couple bad guys here and there. It's all great. This is the day Mark and Omni-Man have been waiting for, and Mark is excited to finally have powers and become a hero. But Omni-Man knows that this signifies the beginning of the end for his time on Earth, so he starts his plans to seize control of Earth for Viltrum, and the first step of that plan is to wipe out Earth's strongest heroes. So he ruthlessly murders all 7 of them, leaving episode 1 with a very unexpected end. And as the pilot episode to the series, I think this episode does a fine job at introducing us to the important characters and some of the minor characters in the series as well. But what it does best is give us that very unexpected and memorable plot twist that sets up the first arc really well. I remember when I watched this for the first time, it was absolute cinema, and it made me realize that this wasn't going to be like any other superhero show. Therefore, I think it's very deserving of an A tier. But moving on now to episode 2, we get introduced to Donald and Cecil, who begin investigating the deaths of the Guardians alongside Damian Darkblood. There is also an invasion on Earth by the Flaxons, which marks the introduction of the teen team. Amber also gets a proper introduction this episode because she starts taking an interest in Mark after his fight with Todd at school. And other than just minor introductions with Mark and the teen team, a cameo from Alan the Alien, not much else happens this episode. But that doesn't mean it's a bad episode at all. It's still early on in the show, and I don't think any of us exactly expect these first couple of episodes to be packed with character development and world building. But all in all, it was a chill episode with a relatively entertaining villain of the week, and we got this awesome scene with Omni-Man soloing their whole race. And the final scene between Cecil and Darkblood was also a pretty good cliffhanger. So overall, I think this is deserving of a B tier. Moving on to episode 3 though, we have the funeral for the Guardians of the Globe, and Darkblood knows Omni-Man is responsible for the murders, so they have a little back and forth. Later, Robot holds a tryout for the new Guardians of the Globe team. The fights here weren't anything special, but the best part of this scene was the back and forth between Rex and Monster Girl. Anyways, Amber and Mark have their little study date, but it's cut short because Mark has to go help Eve with Doc Seismic, which was actually a really good fight with some sweet animation. Rex and Eve also break up this episode because he cheated on her. The Maulers break out of jail, but only one of them makes it out. And lastly, Darkblood expresses his suspicions of Omni-Man to Debbie. I think the best part of this episode was Debbie, in my opinion, because she had a standout moment in terms of her parenting. And I think this is where she first got suspicious of Omni-Man because of how he was talking to Mark after the funeral. And if you go back to watch this scene, you'll realize how Omni-Man was already trying to indoctrinate Mark with Viltrumite beliefs, because he was trying to get him to believe that the deaths of the Guardians were just a part of the job and that it's no big deal, people die all the time. But the way Omni-Man sees death is based on the mentality that only weak die in battle, which is why he didn't feel any remorse during this time, and Debbie calls him out for this. Definitely an underrated scene from this episode, but overall, this was still average. It's not C tier, but definitely like low B tier. Episode 4 though is where the character development really starts to pick up in my opinion, because this episode opens up with a conversation between Mark and Omni-Man, and Omni-Man gives Mark a bit more insight into his life on Viltrum, because essentially Omni-Man says that after his parents died, he felt lost and needed an escape, and Earth gave him in a sense a fresh start, because meeting Debbie changed things for him after losing his own family, and he was able to start a new one with her. And despite his betrayal at the end of the season, which we know was just an act, this scene gives more context as to why Omni-Man really did change and how Debbie was a really big part in that change. Anyways, Debbie's suspicions of Nolan continue to grow after another conversation with Olga, and things continue to heat up between Darkblood and Omni-Man. Then Cecil came to their house to try and get Omni-Man to go to Mars so he could investigate him in secret. Omni-Man declines and Mark goes instead. Omni-Man isn't happy about this though, and Debbie can tell he's acting strange, so her suspicions only increase, and it's starting to drive a wedge between them because of how much his behavior has changed since Mark got his powers. So they have a date to talk things over, and in the meantime, Mark is finishing up in Mars, but the mission went completely south. One of the astronauts got infected by a sequid and was replaced by a Martian who will later become Shapesmith. But overall, I really enjoyed this episode. I think it did great in terms of of character development for Omni-Man, Debbie, Darkblood, Cecil, etc. It didn't do much in terms of like world building or anything. I know it did introduce the Sequids, but that's probably my least favorite villain in Invincible, but I can't knock it too much just for that. So because of how well it did in the other areas in terms of character development, I think it's an A tier episode. Anyways, the next episode starts with Titan carrying out various jobs for Machine Head. Once he finished them all though, he wanted out, but Machine Head had no plans to let him go because Titan was just too useful. So he pretty much holds him hostage by threatening his family. Then we see Amber and Mark are having some relationship issues because Mark keeps making excuses and showing up late. And Debbie's suspicions reach an all-time high after finding Darkblood's journal. So she pretty much knows it was Nolan who killed the Guardians at this point, but is holding out hope that there was a good reason, and she still needs more proof. But moving on, Titan needs Mark's help to take down Machine Head because he's tired of him terrorizing the city. And when they pull up on Machine Head, Isotope just teleports some people to defend him, and somehow this man got Battle Beast in here. I don't know how, but this fight was very good. It didn't end well for Mark and the Guardians. They got beat pretty bad, and of course Amber's really mad at Mark now because he stood her up again. But honestly, this was just a fun episode to me because the main plot with this episode, that being Titan and Machine Head, isn't really relevant to the wider story of Invincible at all. But it's still a nice break from the major world-shaping conflicts which happened later, and it's executed really well. Machine Head is an icon and probably the funniest character in the show, and the show does a good job at humanizing Titan as a villain because he was carrying out these acts for the sake of his family and the city. This episode also gave us a super memorable fight with Battle Beast versus the Guardians, and Mark grows as a hero during this fight as well, understanding that sacrifices in his personal life have to be made for the greater good. So honestly, this episode has a lot going for it. The only bad thing about this episode is that it had Eve's dad in it, and he just sucks in general. But other than that, this episode is great, and I'm gonna give it S tier. Moving on to episode 6, we see DA Sinclair abducting students on campus to turn them into reanimate. We also see some of the aftermath of the fight from the previous episode. Eve and Mark have an important conversation because Eve has low-key had enough of being a superhero and wants a new life somewhere else. She's also going through a lot with her family, aka the worst parents in fiction. But in the meantime, Amber, William, Mark and Rick are visiting a university when a reanimate attacks. Mark has to step in to save the day, and William realizes that Mark is invincible. But Amber gets mad at Mark because she thinks he ditched them. Debbie goes to meet up with Art to analyze the suit and get the proof that she's been looking for to know for sure that it was Omni-Man who killed the Guardians. After this, William and Rick get kidnapped by Sinclair. Mark saves the day again and manages to put a stop to him though. And lastly, Debbie finally confronts Omni-Man about killing the Guardians. But that's pretty much it for the events of this episode. It was also very relaxed and definitely like a calm before the storm kind of episode. It was much more slow paced, which I don't necessarily mind because there was a lot of character development in this episode, with Eve trying to find herself, Amber and Mark going through a breakup of sorts, Debbie and Art finding out the truth. Robot had his moments as well this episode with Monster Girl and the Maulers. So all in all, this was a chill episode in my books. It doesn't stand out by all means, and it's probably my least favorite episode so far, but that doesn't make it bad because I can appreciate that every good show still needs to slow down the pace and develop the characters in some way, so I'll still put it in B tier. But moving on to episode 7 is where things start to get serious as Debbie and Omni-Man have a conversation about why he killed the Guardians, and not much was revealed about his motives through this conversation. He just asks Debbie to trust him and says that everything will be okay, but of course Debbie is not buying that because he's been lying to her for months at this point, so their relationship is badly damaged. Then we move on to Amber and Mark, who are also having troubles because Mark has been lying to her about his secret identity, and when he tells her the truth, she says that she's known for weeks. And this was a weird move by the writers because it kind of invalidates a lot of her frustrations at Mark and makes her look more like a manipulator, which I won't get into on this video. I've talked about this before. But anyways, Robot goes to finish his plans with the Maulers and get a new body, and Omni-Man starts preparing to tell Mark the truth about Viltrum, but when he goes home he only finds GDA soldiers. Cecil is getting desperate at this point and is pretty much throwing everything he can at Omni-Man just to buy himself more time, but Mark still finds his way to him. Then the Immortal gets revived and he has the fight with Omni-Man, but Omni-Man kills him in the end, leaving us with a great cliffhanger. This episode was really great. I really enjoyed the scenes between Robot and the Maulers. The dialogue between them was very fitting and does a good job of depicting them as like the geniuses of the series, and their fight was also really well executed, definitely underrated in my opinion. Debbie and Cecil having their back and forth this episode was also a good watch, and of course Immortal vs Omni-Man is a goated fight as well. Honestly, this episode has so many cool and memorable moments and is definitely a highlight for this season, so I'll be putting it in S tier as well. And last but not least, we have the season 1 finale. Omni-Man finally tells Mark the truth about Viltrum, and he tries to convince Mark to join him, but that didn't work out and they have a huge fight over it. Well, it was less of a fight and more of a beating, but still. After this, there's a montage just showing the aftermath of the fight and stuff. Cecil tries to get Mark to replace Omni-Man, but of course he's not really ready yet. Debbie and Mark are pretty shaken up after everything, as is most of the world. And lastly, Alan goes to visit Earth again, and Mark tells him everything that happened so that he can report back to the coalition of planets. But honestly, what can I say about this episode that hasn't been said already? We got great world building after learning the truth of Viltrum. We had one of the best fights in the whole series, so many memorable moments. It was packed with emotion, so much character development from just one episode as well. I can't tell you how many times I've gone back to watch these scenes. They just don't lose their feeling. Really really well executed in my opinion, and definitely the best episode of the season. It's an instant S tier from me. But that's pretty much it for this video. If you guys enjoyed, please be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you thought of my ranking. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? I'm a big fan of season 1, you know, nothing even went below B tier. Will we say the same thing about season 2 and 3? We'll have to wait and see. But that's pretty much it for this video, and I'll see you guys next time.